To kick things off today, we have two gentlemen that it's been a pleasure for me to spend the past few days with. They're amazing UFO researchers. I don't know if you all are aware, but in 1966 we had a major UFO incident just north of town at the Sam Gonzalez Ranch, which is now owned by a wonderful lady, Mary Moya. So we went out there, Ben and Tony and I and the other speakers. We went out there yesterday and we had a drone pilot bring his drone in, and we took Geiger counters and EMF meters, and we found a lot of interesting stuff out there yesterday. So we're very happy today to have from the History Channel TV series Hangar 1, the UFO Files, two of the top UFO investigators for the Mutual UFO Network, MUFON. First of all, we have Mr. Ben Moss, Chief Investigator for MUFON and a member of a task force that is on call all the time. When anything major breaks anywhere in the United States, they send Ben out to investigate. He's that quick task force response team. Also, Tony Angiola is also a MUFON investigator and has been researching UFOs since the early 1990s. So Ben and Tony have looked into some of the world's best known UFO cases. And today they're going to bring you information about one of my favorite cases, which I believe is one of those few UFO cases that's sort of like the smoking gun of UFO research. That's a Socorro, New Mexico case from April 24th, 1964. And so they're going to be talking about today. So ladies and gentlemen, please give a big round of applause and South Texas welcome to Mr. Ben Moss and Tony Angiola.
Hello? Yeah, go ahead.
Working?
Yeah.
Check. Thanks for having us. Saw most of you last night. This is a great festival. We do a lot of conferences, and this is probably the best run festival that we've done. How many people here have seen or know about Socorro, New Mexico? Was that? Okay, so a good number. We spent the last 4 years investigating this, and it started out when we saw James Fox talking about his movie that's coming out. He had a clip about the Socorro incident, and so we talked to him afterwards, and we're going to show a clip. We searched for the Socorro footage I saw on a TV show Sightings, and we told him we'd find it, we did. And then we got hooked up with Ray Stanford, the original NICAP investigator in 1964 that Dr. Hynek had invited down to the site. And so once we got with him and we started digging into the case, we decided to visit Socorro several times, and we talked to the family and several of Lonnie Zamora's friends, and really got a lot of information about the case.
I wasn't sure how far you're going to go with that. I'm sitting there thinking, what is he going to say that I can say? But like you said, he mentioned we got hooked up with Ray Stanford, who was the original NICAP investigator, and he gave us a lot more information. When we thought there was nothing more to find, this particular case seems to continue to reveal itself each year. Somebody comes forward, whether it's a truck driver who's driving a beer truck who says that, or actually he told his family, and it went down through a couple of generations, and they come back around to tell us, what they saw. And just the evidence alone that we're going to show you, the way it's presented to make it easy for you to understand. Has anyone here seen the show Sightings from the 90s? Oh, good. So many of you will be new to what you're going to see. We were able to chop up some of the work that they did to tell the story, and then we will fill in the blanks in between so you get full encompassing knowledge of the case. So let's get started. It's a lot of stuff. This is a piece of art that Ray Stanford did that shows the symbol as close as we thought it was at the time, and this symbol on the hat's a little bit closer to what Lonnie Zamora saw. And what's interesting about this particular photograph is that Project Blue Book didn't get some of this correct. How close he was to the craft and how he's laying down there covering himself. When you watch the video, you're going to see him hit the car and his glasses fall off. That came after he was laying prone on the ground, just a side note. So with the event, we're just going to go ahead and show you the beginning here.
This is filmed on location.
April 24th, 1964, the little town of Socorro, New Mexico was quiet. Police officer Lonnie Zamora was not surprised. During the 5 years he'd been on the force, Socorro had almost always been quiet. When Lonnie spotted local teenagers speeding through town, he figured riding him up might be the biggest excitement of the day.
So Lonnie was kind of on random patrol and a speeder passed by. We broke this up just to kind of give you a timeline of the events, but this was filmed exactly where it happened. And it's just interesting the way this plays out because, you know, instead of recreating or talking about it, we just found a lot of clips that tell the story, and then we'll backfill in with a lot of the evidence that we found and uncovered by talking with Ray Stanford.
Also, the guy who was chasing was a local in town. Everybody knew who he was. He wasn't some outsider, as you'll hear in some reports that he had California plates and things like this. He was a guy that Lonnie knew.
Whatever Lonnie saw, he apparently was not the only one. Just a few minutes after Lonnie drove into the Arroyo, a motorist who has never been identified pulled into a gas station on the north side of Socorro.
Okay, I guess. I tell you, your aircraft sure fly low around here. How's that? We were south of town, headed north. Something flew right across the hood of the car, doing about 150 miles an hour. Almost hit our car. A white oval-shaped object. Scared us to death.
Jimmy Grinder was only 13, but he remembers the incident vividly.
Did you folks call the police? No, there was a cop. Looked like he was chasing it, going the same way that the craft was, headed west, with his lights on, his siren and everything.
I believe Lonnie saw something, same as the tourists saw, something that they had never seen or encountered before. You know, it did not meet a helicopter type scenario, definitely wasn't an airplane type scenario. And so you rule those two things out. In 1964, what do you have? It definitely wasn't a weather balloon.
So this kind of hit the news pretty fast, and this is probably one of the reasons why a lot of information got out that the government Project Blue Book didn't want out. But this hit the press fast, and you'll hear some interviews with Walter Schroed from Socorro about this later. But what's interesting, a lot of the cases that happen, I don't think there's any one case that came out ahead of the curve. So the newspapers picked this up very quickly before the government could kind of put a clamp on it and change the symbol and do some things we'll show you shortly.
The chase proceeded to the edge of town and beyond, out into the desert. Lonnie Zamora had no warning. He was about to leave a safe, secure world and enter the realm of the unexplained.
What's interesting is when we were there, we found this exact road that he went up. His police car was about 12 days old, brand new car. So for Lonnie to take a brand new car up over a hill that took him 3 attempts to get up tells you a little bit about Lonnie. Lonnie was a very respected police officer. He was a really nice guy. He thought that possibly there was something in trouble and that he was going to investigate, even if it took. We took a rental car up this road and beat it to death, you know, in 2014, the first time we visited the site. And he's in a 1964 brand new police car that, you know, you would think he would try this, but because he probably thought some people were in trouble, that just tells you the character of Lonnie.
There was also a very loud roar. This object made a tremendous noise, like a space shuttle taking off. And he also knew that that location is where the dynamite shack was located, so he either thought it had exploded or it's about to explode. When he saw this thing, thought an airplane was coming down. And like Ben said, the original road was so steep and with so many rocks, our rental car couldn't go up it. Perhaps over the years, water erosion could have made it a little bit worse, but it was still incredibly steep. We had to find another way to get there, and we still beat the rental car up. When he got to the top of that hill, this is what he saw in the distance, about 150 yards out. and he saw these two beings in white coveralls. And then he stopped right here for about maybe 20, 30 seconds, and then he continued on.
So there were 3 callers before the incident happened. 3 different callers called in the police and said that they saw an object heading towards Socorro from Albuquerque. And that's the first set of witnesses. Then you had the Opel Grinder, its gas station, the Family 5 that saw it where it almost hit their car. Several other people heard the roar. There were a couple of women that heard the roar. And when Sergeant Chavez showed up, we think he actually saw the object also, but we'll get into that a little bit later. And then you had Paul Keyes and Larry Kratzer, 2 brothers, that said they were driving on the other side, and they saw dust coming up, which was probably Lonnie's car kicking up dust, and they saw the object leave the area. This is a classic photo.
Yeah, this is Ray Stanford, and that bush you see right there was sliced in half. It's a creosote bush, and this blue flame, which we'll talk about later, sliced it completely in half. And in order to do that, the temperatures that need to be reached, they're really incredible. You couldn't do it within a couple seconds, let alone even a couple minutes. Notice Ray's left foot, the shadow. You can't see it because of the whitewash on the black and white, but there's a big, huge indent there. That's where one of the feet of the craft was pressing down.
When going up to halfway, I could see a white object to my left there. I thought it was a turnover car. When I got up on top of the mesa there, I looked down and I seen this big white object on the ground. I could see something around the craft there. I could see some figures looked like they were walking around the craft.
Socorro.
So at this point, Lonnie's a little confused about what's going on. He's trying to radio back to tell them that he may have an incident here. But we're going to get into the fact that this incident changed Lonnie's life. He was never the same after this. He had a Catholic upbringing, and when he initially saw these creatures, after this event, he went to his preacher for about 3 hours. He thought he'd seen demons. And when we were in Socorro the second time, we talked to a gentleman named Paul Harden who said that the preacher told him to say, this is what you do. You either never talk about this or you tell the truth. And so Lonnie decided to tell this story. He never embellished it. It was the same throughout his life. He passed away about 14 years ago. But it definitely, from talking with his daughter, he was never the same. It just shattered his worldview. And it's interesting that he thought they were demons at first, and then later on you'll hear him talk about the creatures, which is, that he came to the determination they just weren't from around here, which meant not human.
Also, what the video does not show is that these creatures or beings were looking underneath the craft. Here they just kind of show meandering around the side, but they were looking underneath it, actually, and we think that there was something wrong. Another thing the video doesn't show is that it was actually tilted down. The front end that's pointing up is actually pointing down. In the camera angle, they got it completely wrong. The door should be on the other side. You shouldn't even see the door. And the front of the craft was pointed towards Lonnie, and it was pointed down, which I think signifies something's wrong with the craft, because you imagine it being horizontal when it lands, and it was all kind of cockeyed. It was kind of strange, but they didn't show that here. So here's a view from the perspective of the creatures, seeing Lonnie approaching the top of the hill, because what he said was that they looked startled.
Yeah, one of them turned and kind of jumped, and the person that drew this did a good job of showing. They looked surprised that they saw somebody coming towards them.
Ben, how do we know how tall these guys were?
When Ray was down on site with Dr. Heineck, he stood next to a creosote bush and said they came up to about here, so maybe about 4 feet tall. And we know that Black Projects never used midgets or small people to fly aircraft, and we'll show you in the investigation that the Blue Book checked with everybody, Bell Labs, Hughes Aircraft. Everybody had to answer because this was an investigation commanded by the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the President. And they had to give honest answers. And everybody said that what our craft, we did not build this, we have no idea, and we don't have this technology today that you'll see how this thing operates.
Lonnie made several attempts to contact police headquarters. He was never able to break through the heavy static. After he heard two metallic sounds like doors clanking shut, he realized the small figures had vanished.
So this flame come up from underneath it, and I ran back behind the car. And it went up to 20, 30 feet up in the air.
So at this point, Lonnie had gotten close enough to see the symbol on the side, which we'll talk about later. Which one do I have here?
Basically, as I mentioned before, Lonnie actually hit the ground prone with his head turned to the side.
Army
They don't show
training.
that
Yeah,
on the
Army
video, Army training. And he had his glasses on, and those glasses were not prescription, they were just readers like these. Only his were, 1964 version. So he didn't need them to see, he just needed them to read. So you hear a lot of, I guess people like field classes out there trying to...
People that try to debunk the case, I mean, the hoax theories don't hold up if you've been on site, you realize that it couldn't have been a balloon, couldn't have been a hoax. It's just impossible. This is a depression area. If the craft was in trouble, this was the perfect area to land in because you're in this bowl depression and there's a ridge around it. So
it's not that big of a bowl like they just see on TV. They put mountains, and it's an arroyo, and it is a depression.
But all indications are that they were having some kind of trouble, and they had to land. They thought they had landed somewhere that they were safe, and that's why they were startled when they saw Lonnie coming towards them.
In fact, this was on site, and that picture you see right there is pretty accurate to what it is today as well. Another thing I wanted to mention was that when they say flame, we're used to hearing flame as fire, as smoke. This was a smokeless flame. It was more of a subatomic particle exhaust,
Blue
if you will.
plasma.
Like a blue plasma, right, which was very hot locally. And we'll talk more about the investigation later when it comes to radiation and half-life.
This is I have this picture. I was telling Don Schmidt that I had this picture, but this is the original Blue Book photograph. You can see up close the 4 imprints. You see the round circles of the rocks. They put those rocks around the imprints to protect them. They were wedge-shaped imprints. Some people claim that this was the lunar lander, which had ground prints, but the lunar lander in 1964 of April was not flying. It was being dropped from cables to test the strut integrity of the legs. And the lunar lander used a caustic type of hydroxide material that when they burned it in atmosphere, because it was supposed to operate in non-atmosphere, they had to rebuild the engine every time. And it couldn't stay up for maybe 1 or 2 minutes, but at this time it wasn't flying. So we ruled out pretty quickly, as Blue Book did, the lunar lander.
And during our first visit to Socorro, there's our car parked approximately in the same spot. Notice the mountains in the background. We tried to line it up pretty close, just to show there's a little bit of erosion change you can see there, but for the most part, it's pretty much the same.
So we just stayed there for a while, and then finally just took off slowly to the west. Dios mío. At first, after I got to my senses, I said, did I see it or didn't I, Or what happened, And that's it.
What's interesting is, Lonnie said a little bit more as time went by, but he was very cautious. He for a long time, he said things in white coveralls. He didn't say creatures or people for a while, and he added a little bit more as he got more comfortable talking about what he think this thing was from another world towards the end of his life. But initially, we'll show you that after he talked to the FBI was there. They didn't want to announce they were there, but they were there. He had to change a lot. He stopped talking about the symbol. He completely stopped talking about the creatures because they told him to stop saying it. So they were trying to put a lid on things, but we'll show you that Dr. Heine kind of let the cat out of the bag.
Lonnie radioed to an old friend, Sergeant Sam Chavez of the New Mexico State Police. He told Sam to come fast and to come alone.
¿Qué estás haciendo, Blair? Are you okay? What happened out here?
I saw it. I saw it. I mean, I saw it.
I could tell that Lonnie was excited and probably scared.
Scarred.
I lost my glasses. That's what.
There they are. I'll get them for you, okay? Relax. Take a deep breath.
Lonnie's he's a very dependable, honest type of person. He's not one to create or make stories or build things up to make exciting, anything like that. He's a very well-liked type of a person.
Saw two of them.
Two of them what?
People, the little ones, they were in the uniforms, white.
Let's go take a look, huh?
No, I'm not going down there.
Come on. You don't have to be afraid of anything. Come on.
Wait, no, I'll be right behind you.
What the hell is this?
We found some indentation on the ground where this thing had landed, and the marks into the ground were 9 inches deep, 8 inches long, and 9 inches wide.
What's interesting is when I think Dr. Heine came out with kind of a calculation that the object to press that much into the soil was about 9 tons. And so you're talking about a pretty heavy, pretty substantial craft. And these wedge-shaped, there's almost nothing I can think of that flew back then that had wedge-shaped landing gear. So we're starting to differentiate between anything man-made and something else altogether.
Sam Chavez also, he saw this thing, and we'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later, because he saw how Lonnie was treated, this and that, and didn't want to get involved, but he told his other fellow police officers that he saw it up in the distance as he was pulling up.
Yeah, I'll add a little bit there. Ray Stanford told us that when he interviewed the officers, that several officers saw this, and there were other instances before and after this event, but after the way Lonnie was treated, he didn't want to say anything to anybody. And Chavez wasn't going to tell anybody he saw it, but he got there in time, probably see it going off in the distance towards the perlite mill.
That's where the blast took off. It walked me right over the car.
I started looking for tracks, human tracks. The only thing I found was impressions on the ground that were made by a perfect circle. But I found no human tracks, no shoe prints.
Within 90 minutes, U.S. Army officials at nearby White Sands Missile Range sent Captain Richard T. Holder to investigate.
One thing, when he said no human tracks, he meant like a hoax, like humans. He didn't mean the beings that were there, because there were small footprints and little indentions where the ladder was.
Yeah.
This is the first time Holder has ever talked publicly about what he saw.
Well, my first impression was that it was something from the range that needed possible help, first aid, attention, or at best security. The more I got into it, the less convinced I was that was the case.
Holder also noticed the unusual impressions left in the sand. On the edge of the landing area, he found a bush burned to a crisp on only one side, as though seared by a blowtorch.
Gentlemen, this area is now officially designated sensitive. This entire area needs to be quiet.
Yes, sir. Folks, if you just move right on back. Officers, if you would please take charge of these folks.
We're going to need to secure this channel.
State Trooper Ted Jordan was taking pictures. His camera and film were confiscated on the spot.
I do recall that they told me that they would develop them and send me copies of them. It never occurred. And when I asked later about it, they told me that the film was no good. It had been ruined by radiation.
You hear about this a lot. Missing evidence, disappearing. We'll tell you a little bit more about other evidence that disappeared as well.
Yeah, it's interesting because there was radiation apparently, but right after this incident, he got there pretty quickly. But the next day, there was no radiation. You're talking about a very quick half-life, which is very unusual. This blue flame, whatever it is, created a radioactive imprint, signature, that disappeared the next day.
Gentlemen, what we're looking for is anything metallic. Metallic could be shiny, could be dulled object. We'll do a magnetic scan later.
We looked around to try to find out if we could see any evidence of anything that would make us think it was a hoax. We found nothing. Everything we saw seemed to support the story that Officer Zamora recounted. My impression of talking to him was that he was mystified. He wanted an explanation. Nothing that I heard of later gave me the slightest hint that he did this as a hoax or cooked it up for fame or fortune.
It was actually just the opposite. Lonnie said later in life that if he could do it all over again, he would have never mentioned this because it just ruined his life. He was a changed man, and when we talked to his daughter, she just said he was never the same. It was something that he wouldn't talk about with a lot of people, but if some of his closest friends, he'd bring it up and talk to them, but they knew not to bring this up themselves. They'd just wait for him to say something, or they didn't talk about it at all.
You saw how many people were represented in that video? It was probably twice or three times that. The whole site was trampled as soon as this thing hit the news. And Lonnie was ridiculed on the street by little kids like that one right there by the gas station. They would make fun of him, calling like the alien guy or UFO cop and things like this. And it was hard for him, being a professional that he was. You want to introduce this?
Yeah, this Ray Stanford, that's Ray Stanford on the left, Dr. Hynek on the right.
A young Ray Stanford.
Yeah, Ray is a little mad that we show this, but he told us at one point we could show 45 seconds of this. But this is Dr. Hynek confirming that the film was fogged by radiation. Dr. Hynek was Project Blue Book's investigator. That new show that's on TV portrays him in a drama-based way, but he was the guy that they sent, and Ray was not, they didn't want Ray down on the site, but Dr. Hynek and him were friends, so Dr. Hynek said, you need to let Ray down. So they investigated this together, and we're good friends with Ray now. We've gotten a lot of data from Ray. But this is something that's probably only been seen by one other conference group that we did a couple of years ago.
Well, the story is, as far as my recollection is concerned, entirely accurate. The films were indeed fogged. Those are the facts. The inference from that is that possibly the fogging was due to high radiation since he was there immediately afterwards and close to it.
So that just gives you an idea that we're dealing with an exotic propulsion. If this was a propellant-driven engine, it probably wouldn't leave any radioactive signature.
By the next morning, newspapers and wire services all over the country had picked up the story. Around Socorro, rumors ran rampant. Wild stories of flying saucers and funny little people. Everyone wanted details.
They stopped me all over town and wanted to know this, wanted to know that. And then I got phone calls from all over the world. And I was getting, disgusted with it.
And that says it all right there. Lonnie was really tired of it. If he had cooked this up, he had a chance to become famous. Everybody wanted to talk to him. A lot of different countries wanted to talk to him. He was getting calls from everywhere. That wasn't the way he was. He was just a very simple person, nice guy, didn't want any of this to happen, and really hated the fact that he had to go through all this. And it affected his family and a lot of people in the community that knew him.
And he was offered a lot of money too, and he turned it down.
Yeah, he never took any money. He stopped talking about it for a good 15, 20 years, and then picked up later and talked about it before he passed away.
The Air Force followed up the Army investigation with its own team. After a cursory once-over, the Air Force agreed that Lonnie saw something. They insisted, however, that it must have been a secret military test device.
We'll cover that.
Yeah, let's not get into that yet. This here is a video with Ray Stanford in his living room, and we've spent probably thousands of hours with Ray and his wife. And if you don't know Ray Stanford, he's a remarkable individual. He also discovered dinosaur bones, a nodosaur in Maryland near Goddard. and it's on display at Goddard. He was in the newspaper.
Yeah, he was all over the news. All the major networks covered his. Basically, he found a 55 million old large slab of poop on the Goddard walking trail, and it had over 44 different dinosaur prints in it. It's one of the most amazing discoveries, and the first one inside of the Beltway. So Ray, we were at his house. He had the replica in his basement. I actually have the great privilege of discovering a new print because I'm a lot taller than Ray is, and I could look down on it. I found another print on the side of it, but it's one of the most amazing discoveries. We were at Goddard with Dr. Lockaby, who's one of the top guys in this field, and he was on, he was Person of the Day on Anderson Cooper. He was on ABC News. So Ray is a very observant, very sharp man.
And how many people went by that slab over the years and never saw it?
Yeah, it was on the walking path. Ray is known for looking up and catching UFOs, and he's also has looked down and went back 55 million years in time to discover these footprints. He's very sharp. Red sandstone was a clue to him, and even when they were on TV recently with Dr. Lockaby, he pointed to a red sandstone and said, maybe that's something there, and they walked over the camera, flipped it over, and there were dinosaur prints on the other side of it.
And subsequently, it's sad to say, but it turns out the entire parking lot of Goddard was a fossil. They had no idea. Tractors came in, just destroyed everything, put it in the parking lot.
Could have been a lot more there.
It could have been a lot more there. So the fact that they did not destroy the walking path, and
it's luck. Yeah, it's just luck.
It was just, yeah, pure luck. But at the same time, Ray's a fascinating guy, and wherever he goes, he seems to shoot UFOs. And in the future, we're going to have a lot more presentations for you with some really amazing footage, hopefully. But he keeps finding fossils. We go to his house, and you'll see here in a minute, hopefully you'll see enough around where his chair is. There's nowhere to walk in his house. There's tons of fossils that he just finds in
the Smithsonian visits his house often and always asks, can you please donate some of your dinosaur fossils and his incredible meteorite collection. I was telling some people earlier that one day we were at Ray's house, we held a moon meteorite, a meteorite that was probably from Mercury, and a Martian meteorite.
So here he is. Oops, let me go back. Wow, that's not playing. There we go.
Talking about Tuesday, the 29th of April, 1964. Now, I'd been invited on the police radio by Dr. Heineck to come out to the site over the protests of Sergeant Sam Chavez of the New Mexico State Police, in whose car Heineck and Zamora had arrived at the site earlier. And so I came out there, and at that point the police car was up at the top, about 50 feet from the actual center of the landing site, and right on the edge, not 100 feet away, not 150 feet away, as various accounts say. It was about 50 feet away. Now, I'll explain what happened. After we went over various things down at the landing site, and which I covered completely in my book, we went back up the ravine, and the police car, and Heineck was explaining to me, I had Chavez park his car right, Lonnie was with us, of course, they ride all three up together in that car. It was a state police car. Lonnie, see, wasn't on duty. That's why they weren't in the city police car, because Lonnie wasn't on duty. He's in plain clothes in the picture with me and Chavez and him that was released recently on the CIA document. Kind of funny after 52 years, but
that's the picture. Nice bouffant hairdo there, right?
All the he said he had it parked right there, exactly where, with the kind of orientation he had during the actual event, and somebody, I think Zamora shop, somebody opened the door, and Zamora explained how he got out and he took a few steps and he showed us. He said, and the roar started and I threw myself on the ground.
This is the image that Ray colorized later.
You don't find this in the Air Force account that he did that. All you find out is that he bumped the back of the car and knocked his glasses off and kind of stumbled. And no, he threw himself, and he used the words, in a prone position as he had been taught in the military. You hear, expecting a spoken car, you throw yourself down low as you can on the ground in a prone position. He had his head turned to the right, and it's drawn in the book. And he threw himself, and he showed us exactly where he did this. Then Alan Heineck said to me, Ray, would you mind pacing it off from right there to the burn in the bush?
It takes about 3,000 degrees to ignite creosote full of resin, and this thing played over that.
The burn bush, which is right in the center of the landing quadrangle. And so I paced it off. And using my footprint distance, which I was good at estimating, he was not more than 35 feet, probably almost exactly 35 feet from the center of the object. When he hit the ground, he was, now keep in mind, he had his glasses on. They weren't knocked off until he got up from the prone position when the thing had, he realized it wasn't exploding and he was running and he hit the back of the car and knocked his glasses off. He had them on when he looked at it, when he got out of the car, when he opened the door. When he was facing it and the roar started and he threw himself in the opposite direction and down on the ground in a prone position. At, I think, if I remember correctly, about 15 feet from the car, 50 feet total to the center of the landing where the exhaust had played and burned part of the crystal bush. So Heineck watched me, we stepped it off and we concluded that was 35 feet, 36 feet there that he was from it. Now that is far closer than in the Air Force report in anything we see, but it's the truth because Chavez was there. He knew where the car was parked. He knew where Zamora's car was parked when he was the next person to arrive in response to the police call. And I should add this, that I didn't discuss it with Chavez, but every policeman I talked to on the Socorro police force told me that Chavez, because he heard the police call, he was coming up the slope and he saw the object high in the sky and it was going away. And I'm confident that he did because they all told me exactly the same story. They said Sam doesn't want to talk about it because he wishes this had never happened too, like Zamora. And he said he doesn't like investigators coming here because he thinks this must have been a government project of some sort. And he didn't want to talk about it, but he saw it. Now they said that he said it was just, see, he's seeing it this is an ellipsoidal object, as you see the drawing in my book and all the other drawings of it. And as it went up, and it's going up like this, he's looking right so he's just seeing a little round object going away at high speed up into the sky on the approximate coordinate of the Perlite Mill over to the generally west, but it's hanging up steeply and very steeply into the sky. So Chavez did see it. I'm confident he did, even though I did not ask him. I knew I'd already been advised by the police about his attitude on it, but Chavez saw it. I'm sure of it. And anyway, the distance is indisputable. Why does the Air Force not tell you that he hit the dirt 35 feet from there? Heineck knew this. Why isn't it in the report? Well, the report you see in the Air Force file, the major thing you see is this thing that Captain Richard T. Holder wrote out, with the FBI agent standing right there in the room with him and Zamora the whole time until about 1 o'clock when they finally concluded that night. And they're putting exactly what they want to go. And they asked Zamora to, we know for sure that Richard T. Holder asked Zamora to obfuscate the red and symbol, describe something else. They came to a conclusion, and that's what's drawn in the report. That is the arc with the arrow and the line dirty. It is not what he saw. Zamora's original report to the police officers was that the insignia on the side was large, 2 to 3 feet across. And let me tell you that at 50 feet from his car and at 35 feet from where he was facing it before the roar started, he saw that as plain as day. And they conclude that it was probably a lunar lander. Imagine this. A lunar lander that would hardly hover at that stage of development, maybe it wasn't. I mean, it certainly went not flying. You don't fly it all the way from Holloman Air Force Base, all the way across the mountains and the terrain and land it in Socorro's backyard, so to speak. It's completely insane, and it certainly could not take off and reach what one engineer calculated to be supersonic speed at high speed going straight up.
Ray's pretty animated.
That's Ray for you. He'll talk like that for 15 hours straight. Wear you out.
Ben, this is not an isolated case. The tic-tac shape that we hear about, France, Germany, Italy, all over, even to this day.
Yeah, when we were on site in last year, 2018, and Tony was next to me. He didn't see it happen really fast, but we were at the site.
Is your microphone all working?
It's on? Yeah. So I saw something out of the corner of my eye, and I have pretty good hand-eye coordination. I play tennis, but an object, and it was a tic-tac shape, but maybe about that big, came by me. At first I thought I was seeing a bird, but I barely could track this thing. It went by me doing ground contouring. So if a hill came up, it did this. And when it went over the ridge, it blew by me at least maybe 100 miles an hour. I don't know how much faster, but it was only about that big, and then rose up over the hill and then went out of sight.
So you think it's similar to that drone video?
Yeah, there's drone video recently of the same type of object. So, you know, it's just, when we go there, it's funny. We'll say, we're here, please show up again, you know, give us a chance to take a photograph. But it was just so weird. I've never seen anything like that. And I know birds can, when they come down, can go really fast, but I have no idea what that thing was, but it was fascinating.
Dr. Hynek went to Socorro. He talked to Lonnie, studied the landing site, and examined the photographs. He found the physical evidence extremely compelling, but the most persuasive argument for a genuine UFO sighting was Lonnie Zamora himself.
158.5.
That's good.
Okay, Lonnie, now these depressions you said were actually from the outriggers.
They held up the craft.
Dr. Hynek was enormously impressed by Lonnie Zamora. He thought there was virtually no possibility of a hoax. And on May 20th, he wrote a private memorandum which he kept in his files and which I discovered years after his death, in which he expressed huge disdain for the Blue Book handling of the report. And he said that it was clear that the story that Blue Book had cooked up about this possibly being some kind of experimental aircraft was a story that even Blue Book knew to be untrue, but which was invented to keep Congress from harassing the Air Force.
Yeah, this is interesting because Hector Quintanilla, who was running Blue Book at the time, really wanted to solve this. He didn't like having any loose ends, and he didn't believe that it was anything but maybe a military craft. So he got top secret clearance. You know, this was coming from the very top of government. He got top secret clearance to go to any Army base to ask anybody, did you build this? Do you fly this? And they had to give him a straight answer, or otherwise they were going to be in trouble because the CIA, FBI, Joint Chiefs of Staff were involved. And Hector, in his book, he wrote that this one baffled him to the end. He never solved it. It's still an unknown in the Blue Book files. And he just could never come up with anything because as we dug deeper, we realized that every single Hughes aircraft and Bell Labs, all of them said we didn't build it and we don't have this technology today.
Then also, you know, like weather balloons, if the Joint Chiefs of Staff didn't think this was significant, why would they constantly keep asking for updates?
Yeah, and one of the memos, they called it a vehicle, which is interesting. That was a little slip of the tongue. But everybody, and Holder himself was saying, why does the Joint Chiefs keep asking me about this case? And Donald Menzel, you know, was asking Hynek, is this a hoax? And Hynek was saying, you know, hoaxes don't put indentations in the ground. They don't burn bushes in half. So in the United States, this is probably one of the best close encounters of the third kind because you have a lot of evidence, and we're going to talk about some other evidence here shortly.
I don't know how to play that audio, but...
This is our investigation of the symbol. When I looked up this, the original 3 bars through the inverted V, it resembled a radiation symbol to me. And so I was thinking maybe the arrow, the V is pointing to the blue thruster, and the 3 bars are a symbol from some other civilization of, you know, don't stand here, you're going to get cooked when this thing engages. The drawing that Lonnie signed, a little forensic analysis showed that Lonnie's signature is not the same handwriting as the drawing. We think that either Zamora or Mr. Burns, the FBI agent, cooked up the symbol. But this is the one that got out. But, you know, we found many newspaper articles that came out really fast that showed the inverted V with 3 bars. And the symbol on Tony's hat that we have outside is the one that Hynek drew in the archives that Ray and James Fox found.
Intergalactic Edith Joes. Okay, let's try the audio. This is
Walter Schroed.
Walter Schroed.
About this marking, could you tell us how he described the marking and what the marking was? Yes, I see no reason why not. He described it to me as an inverted V with a sort of a bar across it. And as he described it and drew it, the thing I was reminded of is a typical brand. You have a cattle brand.
That was Dr. Hynek, and what's interesting is that while he was being interviewed, Lonnie was getting grilled by the FBI. And so when he interviews Lonnie, he tells a little bit different story.
The archive?
Yeah, this is when James Fox and Ray went to the National Archives to look at Dr. Hynek's paperwork, and they weren't going to let him touch it or see it, and James pointed out that this is the guy in the photo you guys just released, and so they let Ray hold it up. Circled there is Dr. Hynek's drawing of the symbol, which we think is the most accurate drawing of it. But a lot of misdirection. The government did a good job of throwing a bunch of symbols out there and throwing people off. The reason they wanted to obscure it is if somebody else said they saw this craft and they reported the fake symbol, well, they knew they were making it up. If they reported the symbol that they were trying to hide, then you have a whole different story. This is from Rob Mercer's Blue Book files that were found on Craigslist. It were bought from the son of one of the Blue Book investigators, and it clearly shows the inverted V with 3 bars to it. So we have a lot of documentation that never showed up on Project Blue Book about the Socorro case, but these were Blue Book files from the investigators. This is Ray's field notes that he shared with us at the time in '64 that he drew and modified later. That was in the newspaper. So
Yeah,
the newspaper, they got out quickly, and then it changed down the road
So
when the
quick.
government clamped down on it.
Upside down with you right there. And then here you see, we just highlighted 4 wedge-shaped indentations. And of course, Heineke, he was checking out Angiola and Lonnie.
Yeah, what's interesting is I pulled down every single newspaper in this area and we found there were 9 other instances of an egg-shaped craft. One landed at White Sands Missile Range, and a police officer fired his weapon at it and actually kind of lost his marbles and had to get a discharge. It also, we're not sure about the La Madera landing. We're going to look into that. There was Leavittsville, there was another case where an egg-shaped craft was 200 feet across. But if you go on 60 West, which is where this kind of followed out in New Mexico and Arizona, along this path were at least 9 reports independently of an egg-shaped craft. So this craft was operating in the area. And as we mentioned earlier, the police officer said there were other sightings before and after this event, but nobody wanted to talk about it.
Another interesting thing is when Ray left Socorro, he saw a UFO.
Yeah.
And there were other people on the road with him that he tried to get his camera out and photograph it. Then he caught up with the people and asked them if they saw it. Of course, they weren't looking up. Ray's always looking up. And that was right there in Socorro, shortly thereafter. This is really neat. This is the letter from...
Yeah, this is, Richard Holder had passed away, the investigator on site. His son sent Ray this letter, which is in his book. You have copies, a few copies left of Ray's book. It's an out-of-print book, Socorro Saucer in the Pentagon Pantry. Excellent investigation. But he says in here that my father told me it suggested Lonnie to release to the press, not to release the real symbol. So that's when they cooked up the symbol, and you can't get a better witness than the son of the man who...
And we show this to Kevin Randall, and he still refuses to believe.
The AstroPower symbol came out as possible. This company, AstroPower, had a symbol that we found, and this was investigated at the time. But AstroPower never built any craft. They were a software company. So people that want to find a man-made explanation for this kind of latch onto these things. But when you do a little investigation, it's a software company. They never built any craft. There was never stamped on the side of a vehicle.
I still think it's something not clear. If I could find out what it actually was, okay, I'm satisfied. I just didn't want to go through it again, If they want to believe me, good. If they don't want to believe me, it's all right too.
I believe Lonnie Zamora was a good policeman and an honest man who reported as he felt proper something well beyond his experience. Was it something terrestrial, extraterrestrial? I have no idea.
Right there is going over the dynamite shack. That's not exactly where the craft took off right over it. It was actually off to the side, but it was probably misinterpreted by a lot of people that... I think there should be some more, yeah.
So in covering the evidence, the indentations, like we said, were made by a very heavy craft. They put rocks around them to protect them, and we've been there recently, they're almost gone. They're almost faded completely. They built another site to pull people away from the main site, but it never became a tourist attraction. They never made money off of it.
This is an original photograph, by the way.
Yeah, this was that in probably April 25th of 1964.
You'll notice that the ridge line of that footprint, it looks very indicative of some sort of, wedge-shaped object as it's coming out, as the craft is taking out, it's kind of shimmering left and right and knocking the
self-correcting,
dirt out, like self-correcting, and it leaves that really sharp ridge, which, if you took a shovel and tried to do that, the edges would be more rounded and you wouldn't get the sharp indentation straight down.
What's interesting is the craft, the way it was balanced and where the footprints and the blue thruster was, it was self-correcting, and the blue thruster was exactly in the center of where the four landing gear were. Another thing that any hoaxer wouldn't have thought of was the indentations. Upon analysis, the object came in at an angle and took off at an angle. Who's going to think of that to make indentations?
There's a better zoom in there. There's the wedge-shaped footprint superimposed right into the dirt there, and right below it is basically Lonnie's testimony that's transcribed on the left of what he saw.
So in that depression was a rock. This is kind of a absent-minded professor story, but Lonnie, Dr. Hynek, and Ray were walking around, and Lonnie went over to one of the impressions and says, "It looks like there's a rock that was broken by the strut." And so they all walked over to the hole and looked down in it, and Dr. Hynek goes, I think that's true. And Ray's standing there going, when are they going to reach down and grab it? And so they don't move. And so Ray goes, "We got to go back for the interviews to the police station, and you got to be interviewed." So they all pile in the car and go back, and Ray jumps in his car, comes back to the site and grabs the rock, which had metal shavings in it. We'll get into it. That's the rock right there.
And I think it's Ray's shadow, right?
That's Dr. Hynek.
Dr. Hynek's shadow, yeah.
Here's the rock. Ray still has it.
Yep. And let me zoom in on this here. Those little arrows point to where there's still some metal flakes there. And at the time, when he gave it to Goddard, Dr. Frankel, which then I'll tell you a bit more about in a minute, when he took that rock and gave it to one of his scientists, Ray said, "Please save me some of the sample. Do not scrape everything off this rock." They scraped everything off the rock. And he was really bitter when he got it back. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But with today's technology, we believe that if we can get even the smallest molecule off that rock of a piece of metal of unknown origin, that's another smoking gun. As you can imagine, Ray's very reluctant to let this leave his site.
Yeah. In the top picture, you can see there's metal fragments in there. And when Goddard gave the rock back with nothing on it, they said it was silica. And you can't mistake metal for silica.
We have another picture that shows right here. Let me go to the next one. It shows the rolled metal right there. As the footprint comes down and scrapes against the rock, I don't know if you can see it too well in this representation on my computer, but it's really good. But you can see the curled up metal. Now that piece of metal fell off as he was handing this rock to Richard Haynes.
Yeah.
And it fell into his yard, and they searched hours and hours and hours and couldn't find it. Oh, there it is. Yeah. You can see a better sample of it there.
That doesn't look like silica. So here's more of the interview with Dr. Hynek.
Should get on quickly to the real pièce de résistance of this story.
Right, okay. Well, the real thing was that, the important thing, I think, was that on the rock, when I examined the surface of it, there were metal slivers, some smeared on, and there were three that were actually rolled up perpendicular to the direction which the landing gear seemingly had come down upon me from above. And these were subsequently taken by me along with Richard Hall of the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena and Walter Webb to the Goddard Space Flight Center in Greenbelt, Maryland, where they were analyzed. Analysis was headed up by Dr. Henry Frankel, who was head of his department, the Space Materials Division at Goddard at that time. And according to his telephone report to me the next week, the slivers were comprised of an alloy that was an unusual one, of zinc and iron. Now, zinc and iron are, of course, by no means unusual, but the way they were combined was unusual. In fact, Dr. Frankel said that he had checked the worldwide charts of alloys, including those from the Soviet Union, and that this alloy apparently at the time was not manufactured in any terrestrial foundries. And he said, Ray, this would of course lend itself to, it would certainly tend to support the hypothesis, if you wanted to hypothesize, that the object did not originate on the Earth.
I meant to say Richard Hall earlier, not Hans. But
so that it's interesting because Dr. Frankel had indicated that this was a non-corrosive type of metal. That it was like gold; nothing would affect it. It'd be perfect to paint on a strut that was traveling through atmosphere and maybe landing on different terrain. The structure of the craft, it makes it sound like it was, made to land on a rocky terrain, kind of like the things we were sending to asteroids now that kind of hug it. But it's interesting that we were all excited about it, and then there was silence from Dr. Frankel, and then he got kind of silenced after this.
But didn't we just recently hear about another scientist who had no connection with ufology? He didn't know Ray was a ufologist. He thought he was just a paleontologist.
Ray had a friend, I think he's an astrophysicist or some PhD at Goddard, and he didn't know anything about this case, but he had known Dr. Frankel. And he mentioned to Ray, he said that Dr. Frankel, he got sent to the woodshed after he investigated metal from a UFO. And that's an interesting sidebar just to reinforce the fact that he did get silenced, and they, when they gave the rock back, said, no, didn't find anything, contrary to what Dr. Frankel told him on the phone. But Ray never had contact with him again. This is Blue Book, Hector Quintanilla up front, small staff, it rotated, the staff rotated, but we just wanted to show this to show you it wasn't a great big organization. They did the best they could, but Project Blue Book was really created to kind of explain these things away. They tried their best to explain things as just terrestrial misidentification and hoaxes. And that's why this case is significant, because they couldn't come up with a conclusion. It's still unknown to this day.
And that's Lieutenant Morano right there, right?
Yep.
And didn't he have...
Morano's son is the one that grabbed... he had the files that Rob Mercer got, that he sent to us. We got all the files that he found on Craigslist.
Where were those files found?
In a garage under a bunch of... The house had been sold, and they'd been found, I think, under...
It makes me wonder how much other evidence is out there from...
Yeah, how much is missing from Blue Book that's floating around in
Someone's
Craigslist?
attic, perhaps. Yeah. This is interesting. This is a craft from 2010.
This is just an example of, if we had technology in '64, why would this be happening in 2010?
5, 4, 3, 2, 0.
There goes $25 million.
There's another 10 million.
There's another 10 million. So we just use that to show that we wouldn't be focusing on this type of craft if in 1964 we had an egg-shaped craft that could fly silently. Some of the inside information we received was like this. They checked with NASA. It was not the lunar lander. Initially believed to be an observation of that, but effort to date cannot place vehicle at sight, and of course it wasn't way off site.
So this is when we were there on site the first time. It was very windy, and it's pretty consistent with, each day.
Yeah, the thing about, we know the weather at that time was 45 degrees winds coming out of the direction that the craft departed in. So people that tell you this was a balloon, and no balloon in the world is going to go into a 45-mile-an-hour wind, and you're not going to have people in a balloon in the evening when you have bad weather. Balloonists don't fly at 5 o'clock at night into 45-mile-an-hour winds. There's a lot of erosion there.
For some reason. I don't know why it's not playing, but we had the wind going.
Yeah, we were there as the same weather. The wind blows constantly, and it's very strong.
This is the Dynamite Shack, and when someone had asked Ray who owned the Dynamite Shack because there's some writing on it, Ray went back to look for that photograph. That's Bob McGeary. That's Ray's best friend, that little guy right there, believe it or not. His father was very wealthy and contributed a lot to Ray's ufological investigations. When Ray looked at this photograph again, the reason I put this like this, that's the Perlite Mill Mountains off in the distance. When Ray looked at this photograph again, he saw something really unusual.
Yeah, the reason we're showing this is in 2005, when Ray blew this picture up, turns out he caught some of these craft in the sky. And he hasn't released the photo yet. This is a recreation from, we've seen the photo a great deal. This is what shows up in the photo. Once we get it, we're going to make it public, or Ray's going to make it public. Clearly, 0.6 miles from the camera is an egg-shaped object with 3 landing gear apparent. In the background, there's another egg-shaped object, and they're tilted. They're not flying, and these things don't need to be flying aerodynamically because they're using some kind of exotic propulsion. There's a much larger craft in the background. There's actually 5 objects in this picture.
You can't see the one to the left. Well, I didn't put it in there because this is all superimposed. But there's a large pancake object or cigar ship,
Like a
whatever you wanna call
mothership,
it, a mothership off to the left.
So hopefully we're going to be able to release this on the cover of our book when we write it. But Ray has it. It's Ray's property. If he releases it, fine. If he doesn't, it's a shame.
All the lost footage.
Is it going to play?
Yeah, I think it's playing right now. This is, let me just go back for a second. You can tell them about that.
This is when I talked about James Fox, and I said, look, I thought he was going to show this footage, and I talked to James, and he said, I don't know what you're talking about. I said, look, I saw this. I'm going to find it. So we were on the cover of the MUFON Journal for the search for lost Socorro footage, and what happened was I contacted, Tony and I we called every production company in the United States, and went over to UK, and Henry Dinkler and all these different production companies said, well, I don't have it, it might be NBC, and the company that finally said they might have it, they wanted thousands of dollars for it. So we wrote the article in the MUFON Journal, and then John Ventry called us up and goes, I recorded it, I'll send it to you. We got it 3 days later.
There's nothing super revealing here, it's just kind of neat to see original footage.
It's something that, is lost in time.
Yeah.
Almost instantly, Socorro was the center of intense media interest. But except for the few frames of footage seen here, all film and photographs taken by news agencies and curious onlookers was reportedly caught in April 1964. The family was on vacation in New Mexico. This rare home movie, recorded at the scene of Zamora's sighting, shows the aftermath of the UFO landing and takeoff.
Look at the trash.
Though short in duration, this film footage is significant because it not only validates Deputy Zamora's story, but also provides important documentation for ufologists who continue to study the Socorro case.
So we want to thank a lot of people that we've worked with on this. Ray Stanford, James Fox, Robert Mercer, Chris O'Brien, Norm Gagnon, who did the graphics for us, Kevin Randall, who wrote his book about Socorro after having us on his radio show, and the TV show Sightings, which we stole a lot of material from. We have...
keeping it alive.
We're trying to buy a magnetometer, so we're selling the hats. We have Ray's book. Ray's book is out of print. There's only about probably 50 copies left that he has. He found a box in his attic. The book sells on eBay for $300. We're selling for $70. It's signed by Ray. It's very rare, but if you're a collector, it's something to have.
Or if you're an investigator aspiring to be an investigator, it's a well.
Yeah, it's a great investigation. The detail that Ray went into, the things that he did, just shows you how well this was investigated, and he did a better job than the Air Force did.
Yeah, very meticulous. And that's well. This is a video that we play when we're out there. We'll show you that later. I don't think we.
Yeah, we can. We're out
This
about
is Motors Road. Your road.
That's pretty much it's late. So.
Yeah, so we appreciate it. Thanks for listening.